Howdy partners, welcome to another Book vs. Game episode in which I compare Nancy Drew PC games to the books they're based on. As you've probably guessed by interpreting subtle context clues such as the title of this video being Nancy Drew Book vs. Game Secret of Shadow Ranch, today I'll be discussing the book and game of Secret of Shadow Ranch. The Secret of Shadow Ranch was originally published in 1931, although the game is based on the rewrite, which was published in 1965. If you aren't aware, all of the older Nancy Drew books were rewritten in the 60s, partly to remove racially insensitive content. But it was the 1960s, so a lot of stuff slipped through the cracks, which were pretty sizable cracks to begin with. Stuff like cultural appropriation and outdated language. Unfortunately, Nancy shooting a snake with a pistol did not slip through those cracks and was left in the original 1931 edition. Think about how much time that would save speedrunners if you could simply shoot the snake under Zebra Rock with a gun. Nancy Drew arrives in Phoenix, Arizona, eagerly looking forward to a fun-filled vacation at Shadow Ranch, but abruptly finds herself involved in a baffling mystery. The ranch is being haunted by a phantom horse and maliciously damaged by an unknown enemy. Local people believe that the ghostly animal is carrying out the curse of Dirk Valentine, the romantic outlaw who was killed many years ago at Shadow Ranch, where he had gone to fulfill a promise to his sweetheart. Suspecting that a treasure hidden by Valentine may be at the root of the Shadow Ranch mystery, Nancy undertakes a challenging search, aided by her friends Bess Marvin and George Fane. While seeking further clues, the girls' investigation in a ghost town ends in— no, I'm not gonna read that, that's a spoiler! Nancy Drew's first Western adventure makes truly fascinating reading. If you're prepared to be truly fascinated, saddle up while we trek through this book, and don't forget to check your girth. Whoa there, partner, hold your horses. This is spoiler text accompanied by some spoiler text to let you know that this video will spoil Secret of Shadow Ranch book and game. With this knowledge, you may go riding now.
Dear Hannah, well, I made it to Shadow Ranch, but I'm afraid all is not well.
Secret of Shadow Ranch the game opens with Nancy meeting Dave Gregory at the Phoenix airport and admiring his ass and chaps. Like she literally takes a covert photo of his butt to send to her besties. Secret of Shadow Ranch the book opens on Nancy meeting Bess and George at the Phoenix airport, in contrast to the game, in which Bess and George only arrive after all the major plot events have gone down, late to the Phantom Horse party. "We all have to go home tomorrow," Bess exclaims upon seeing Nancy, "because there's a mystery at the ranch." Oh no, a mystery! What a blow for internationally renowned super sleuth Nancy Drew! Whatever will she do? While George collects Nancy's luggage, Nancy and Bess head to an attractive sandwich shop. At this point, the ghostwriter thinks it's important to note that it's not just the sandwich shop that's attractive. On the way, admiring glances were cast at the two girls. Titian-haired Nancy was a trim figure in her olive green knit with matching shoes. Beige accessories and knitting bag completed her costume. Bess wore a pale blue cotton which showed off her deep suntan to advantage. George returns, and she and Bess provide the reader and Nancy with an exposition dump while they enjoy their attractive sandwiches. George and Bess's Uncle Ed and Aunt Bet recently acquired Shadow Ranch in payment of a debt, whether due to gambling addiction, organized crime, or tax fraud. We never find out for sure. Oh, and also they've been plagued by a phantom horse. It's supposed to be the ghost of the horse which belonged to Dirk Valentine, an old-time outlaw. There's a very romantic legend about him, Bess said. He was the sweetheart of Frances Humber, daughter of the local sheriff, who was the original owner of Shadow Ranch. One night when Dirk Valentine came there to see Frances, the sheriff shot and killed him. As he lay dying, the desperado put a curse on the Humber property, vowing that his horse would haunt Shadow Ranch, and whenever it appeared, destruction would follow. Although the story of Francis and Dirk is pretty similar to how it's presented in the game, I would say that the game's version is more romanticized. For instance, in the game, Dirk doesn't do anything as melodramatic as curse Shadow Ranch with his dying breath, and Sheriff Humber doesn't kill him in a shootout either. He is instead hanged by the long rope of the law. The game also devotes more time to the tragedy of Dirk and Francis's story than just one paragraph. We get to read the personal perspectives of those who played a part in the story, which serves to humanize all of them, but none more so than Sheriff Humber. He gains a lot more complexity in the game, which emotionally portrays his inner conflict as he fights between his love for his daughter and his duty as an officer of the law. When you get to the last page of his journal, it's not just Sheriff Humber's tears marking the page. But back to the book, in which he is summed up in 3 words as the local sheriff. As the girls walk out of the airport, they catch a mysterious man leaving a note on their car which says, "Keep away from Shadow Ranch." Clearly, he's extremely threatened by these 3 teenage girls. And yeah, teen girls are the most intimidating thing I can think of personally. The trio begin to drive to Shadow Ranch, giving Bess and George another opportunity to spout exposition. After his death, Dirk Valentine's curse seemed to become reality. Sheriff Humber's fortunes began to fail, which forced him to sell off almost all the land surrounding Shadow Ranch, including a section incorporating historic cliff dwellings. Bess and George also tell Nancy about one of the other guests staying at the ranch, their cousin Alice, who is 14 and was entirely written out of the game. Alice's father is missing. He's been gone almost 6 months. Ross Rigor had been president of a bank in a suburb of Chicago. Someone reported having seen him enter the bank on the night it was robbed. Mr. Rigor had not been seen since. The police were able to identify the gang easily. A few days later, one of them was spotted in Phoenix but eluded capture. Because of that, Alice thinks the gang is hiding out in this area and holding her father captive. Or if he was released, he's wandering around here, a victim of amnesia. Every claim Alice comes out with sounds like the delusion of a preteen who's in a highly emotional situation and isn't using the logical part of her brain. But the thing is, she's always right. It is never the most simple answer, always the most unrealistic Wattpad fanfic explanation. But Nancy, my dad, was kidnapped by One Direction. Harry Styles himself forged that note that said, "Honey, I'm leaving your mom for my secretary and we're getting a divorce." Alice has slit Occam's throat with his own razor. Nancy is forced to pull over when the car's radiator overheats. And this becomes a big problem after the girls realize their last container of water, supposedly filled by Shorty Steele, one of the ranch hands, is empty, so they are unable to refill the radiator. Fortunately, before long, another car pulls up. It's Dave Gregory, a tall, rangy cowboy who works at the ranch. He says, "Just what I figured. 3 little dudes stuck high and dry." Sorry, I literally had to read that in a southern accent. There's no other way to read that. It just came out, I swear. It was involuntary. But all I want is for Dave Gregory to call me a little dude and then I can die happy. Dave supplies the girls with more water before driving away. George bursts out, "He was about as friendly to you, Nancy, as a prairie dog." Wait, so is he about as friendly to Nancy as he would be to a prairie dog? Or is Dave as friendly as a prairie dog? Who's the prairie dog in this situation? Who's got that prairie dog in them? I need some clarification here. Nancy's like, "Oh, it's whatever," but she thinks to herself, she had not even reached the ranch and already 2 people had been mysterious and unfriendly to her. The girls once more hit the old dusty trail and soon approached Shadow Ranch. It was nearly sunset when the girls entered a rocky pass and came out high above a valley. At the far side loomed a huge mountain with a group of low buildings nestled at its foot. Bess pointed to them. "There's the ranch, and that's Shadow Mountain." "I see how they got their names," said Nancy. "The great peak throws its shadow over the whole valley." Nancy pulled up to the ranch house, a long 1-story adobe building with a vine-covered portico across the front. To the north of the house were the corral and stable. Beyond these stretched a large meadow bordered by a wire fence. In the opposite direction lay the bunkhouse. We learned some highly interesting information about the architecture of the ranch house. The door to the bedroom the girls will be sleeping in is off the portico at the front of the house, alongside another door leading into the main room. So there you go, if you ever wondered where the bedrooms were in the ranch house in Secret of Shadow Ranch, that mystery is solved. The girls meet Elizabeth Bett Raleigh, a slender, dark-haired woman, and Ed Raleigh, a stocky, sunburned man, two characters who we only get to know over the phone in the game, as Ed is in the hospital being treated for a rattlesnake bite, and they somehow get even less characterization in the book, despite having a physical presence. We also meet another character who is sadly written entirely out of the game, the Raleigh's dog, Chief, a handsome black German shepherd. Dave says Nancy is pretty good for a tenderfoot, just because she doesn't flinch when Chief runs up to her. Impressed with Nancy not flinching when she saw a dog, Uncle Ed relents and lets Nancy and the other girls stay to solve the mystery. He realizes she's not like other girls. She likes dogs. Then we get a rapid-fire introduction of the ranch's other residents. There's Alice, a slender girl with dark curly hair and big sad-looking eyes, Shorty Steele, a husky middle-aged cowboy, Tex Britton, a good-looking red-haired cowboy, Mrs. Thurmond, the cook, and a few other miscellaneous cowboys who didn't make the cut into the game, with names like Bud and Walt. Obviously, Game Shorty is a hybrid of the books Shorty and Mrs. Thurmond, because people only realized in the 21st century that men could also cook. Mrs. Thurmond rings the triangle outside the door to call everyone to supper, and they are served a big platter of steaming meat. Yum. That night, Nancy hears someone moving through the house, some kind of creeping creeper. She follows the sound into the kitchen, but suddenly someone grabs her. But it turns out her attacker is just Mrs. Thurmond, who is also on the trail of the creeping creeper. Where did the intruder go? Bess asked. Nancy's keen eyes had Nancy's keen eyes had spotted a trap door beside the old-fashioned stove. Perhaps down there. If he did, Ed Raleigh said grimly, he's caught. That's the cellar, and this is the only way out. Dave, he ordered, come with me. The cowboy turned on his flashlight and Nancy followed the men down a flight of wooden stairs. She found herself in a shallow cellar, which was empty, except for a row of shelves against one wall. When the trio returned to the kitchen and reported no sign of the intruder, the cook shook her head. He was a phantom, she declared, just like that horse. But Nancy is suspicious of Dave. The young sleuth turned to Dave. Did you just come from the bunkhouse? No, Dave said quietly. I was doing some extra investigating. Whatever that means, Nancy thought. The next morning, Nancy discovers that the ranch's main generator and water pump have been sabotaged, much like what happens in the game. She and George accompany Dave into the whimsically named nearby town of Tumbleweed. There, Nancy meets with the sheriff, a gray-haired man named Sheriff Curtis, not the ever-cheery Sheriff Hernandez you chat to in the game. After meeting the sheriff, George goes to purchase a cowboy kerchief, so Nancy browses some of the other stores in town, stopping by one called Mary Deer Gifts. A lot more to the point than Mary's Gifts and Cultural Emporium. Mary Deer Gifts sounds more like what you type into a Google search than the name of a shop. Looking in the window of the store, Nancy catches a man mid-robbery. Unfortunately, the thief gets away, but Nancy is able to retrieve the stolen goods and return them to the shop's owner, Mary Deer, a girl wearing a vivid red dress with a glossy black braid over each shoulder. Clearly, her game counterpart is Mary Yazzie. Although her role in the game isn't huge, her presence in the book is even more reduced, so much so that she's not even considered a possible suspect. She pops up once or twice just to remind you that she still exists, I guess. In the game, she has a personality, she has wants and desires, she has dreams and goals, she has spent more than 30 seconds thinking of a name for her shop. She even gets a sweet romance subplot with Tex. Conversely, this is by far Mary's biggest scene in the book. As a reward for returning the stolen goods, Mary gives Nancy one of the items the thief attempted to steal, a lady's old-fashioned watch on a fleur-de-lis pin. The girl explained that the watch had been a gift to Francis Humber from her outlaw sweetheart. Here is his initial, she said, and pointed to a V and the date, June 1880, inscribed on the back lid. Then she turned the watch over and showed Nancy a heart inscribed on the front. That was Valentine's symbol, said Mary Deer. Legend says he used it on personal belongings like his belt buckle and rings. Even the brand on his horse was a heart. He sounds like a romantic man, remarked Nancy. Mary agreed. He left Frances a treasure, she went on, but she never received it. A treasure? Nancy said. What was it? Mary shrugged. Valentine's will merely stated that his personal fortune was to go to Frances and her heirs. The will did not tell where or what the treasure was. Some believe it was hidden on Shadow Ranch. Nancy's heart leaped with excitement. Maybe this could explain the sabotage at the ranch. Someone wants to force the Raleighs off the property in order to search for the treasure, she thought. Before leaving Mary's shop, Nancy purchases a pastel landscape for herself. When Alice sees the picture, she exclaims, "My father did this! I'm sure of it!" Yes, dear. That night, Nancy gets her first sighting of the phantom. A white, filmy horse which gallops across the meadow before disappearing abruptly. The next day, accompanied by Bess, George, and Shorty, Nancy goes out riding on a handsome bay. And if you've read the City Slicker's Guide to Horses, Volumes 1 and 2, you will know that this is our boy Bob, even though he is never given a name in the book. Nancy was turning the old-fashioned watch over in her hand. Absently, she ran her finger along the front edge and suddenly felt a tiny obstruction. She pushed it, and instantly a thin lid sprang forward. "Why, it's a secret compartment!" she exclaimed. On the top side of the lid was the small, faded photograph of a handsome man with flowing dark hair. "That must be Dirk Valentine!" Nancy cried. In the frame next to the picture of the man was a tiny corner from another picture. "That one's been torn out," said Alice. Carefully, Nancy removed the old picture. On the back in faded ink was the initial V. In tiny script under it were the words, "Green Bottle Inn." Nancy decides to look into the clue by investigating Aunt Bet's bottle collection, which sounds like a euphemistic way of saying Aunt Bet has a drinking problem, but really, it's an incredibly convenient plot device. Bet collects antique bottles, a few of which were found around the ranch. If any hobby screams, "I'm retired!" it's collecting antique bottles. However, Nancy is unable to find any clue amongst Aunt Bet's bottle collection. Then the girls ride out to a nearby ghost town, which is unnamed in the book, hoping to find the artist who painted the pastel landscape, who may or may not be Alice's father. This location is the inspiration for the game's Dry Creek, although you spend a lot more time in the ghost town in the game than the girls do in the book, which I think was a smart decision. A cowboy ghost town is one of the top 10 coolest locations for a mystery story, maybe even top 5. The girls sighted a group of weather-beaten frame buildings clinging to the slope above. As they rode into the streets of the ghost town, they were struck by the silence and the bleached look of the sagging buildings. The group do in fact find evidence of the artist, whose name is apparently Bussy? Oh, sorry, can't read my own writing. Whose name is apparently Bercy, in the form of a pastel crayon on the ground. Still fresh. The girls split up and Nancy goes to search inside one of the houses in the ghost town. Looking out the window, she sees the silhouette of a man in a big hat. Suddenly there came a rumble, growing louder. For an instant, Nancy thought it was thunder and paused. Then she realized the truth. "A rock slide!" she cried out, but the words were lost in the roar as the entire building was jolted from its foundation. This would have been a sick scene in the game. I can imagine there being a second chance where you have to grab hold of the rail, and if you're not quick enough, something catastrophically horrible happens to Nancy. Like in the book, where she falls through the floor to land in a crunched-up bone heap. But she somehow survives, despite falling through the floor into a crunched-up bone heap. Nancy suspects the man in the big hat deliberately caused the rock slide. He started the ball rolling, so to speak. On the way back to the ranch, the girls stop to explore a mysterious cabin. Inside the cabin, they find another pastel and half-full mugs of coffee which are still warm, indicating that the cabin's occupants fled the scene only moments before they got there. Foiled again, they start heading back to the ranch. As they ride, a storm picks up with pouring rain, thunder, and lightning. The girls reach a river they have to cross to get back to the ranch, but it's risen due to the rain. And Bess's horse, whose name is Choo Choo, is not a river horse. He is not prepared to go full steam ahead into the river. But now they are faced with a capital P predicament. "We can't cross that," Bess wailed. "Come on, Bess, we can make it if we hurry." As she spoke, Chief whined and put his paw into her stirrup. He's begging for a ride, George said. The dog leaped to a large rock beside the water and Nancy pulled up close to him. With her help, Chief squeezed onto the front of the... I'm still thinking about Chef. With her help, Chief squeezed onto the front of the saddle and Nancy held him there. "All right, boy," she whispered to him. "Here we go." She gathered the reins firmly and guided her horse into the water. The big animal did not fight the current, but swam along easily with it, heading gradually for the opposite bank. As he clambered safely ashore, Chief jumped off and Nancy turned in the saddle to see how the others were faring. One by one, the big, dependable river horses made the crossing safely, but Bess, on Choo-Choo, was last. The animal entered the stream and walked until the water swirled around his shoulders. Then he stopped. "If he doesn't swim, he'll be swept away," George exclaimed. "Help!" called Bess. "He won't move!" With the torrent rising fast, Nancy spurred her mount along the bank until she was some distance above Bess. Then she guided her horse into the turbulent water. "Hold on, Bess, we're coming!" Suddenly, a few yards upstream, part of the muddy bank collapsed, sending a huge surge of water sweeping over Nancy and her horse. In a few moments, her mount steadied himself and began to swim toward Bess's horse. When they drew close, Nancy seized Choo-Choo's reins. While the frightened girl clung to the saddle, her horse was towed to shore. "Oh, Nancy," she exclaimed, "you saved us!" I think this is one of the best scenes in the book. It's so tense and really stuck in my mind through the years. You might recall, if you took the time to listen to the radio in the ranch house, that this event is actually alluded to in the game. Hearing it broadcast on the radio makes it seem like foreshadowing, but it's really just another little reference to the book. Back at the ranch, the girls freshen up. One thing about the Nancy Drew books is that they often treat Nancy and her friends as little dress-up dolls, so at this point we get a little parade of all their outfits. Nancy wore a powder blue sweater and skirt and brushed her Titian hair until it gleamed. George wore a smart, dark green linen dress. She was ready long before Bess, who wore a yellow sweater and skirt and changed her hairdo 3 times. Dave wants to talk to Nancy. "I owe you an apology. I see now that you're not the tenderfoot nuisance I thought you were gonna be." Nancy smiled. "This is the first time since I arrived that you've been friendly. Are you always so gruff to newcomers?" He flushed. "No, but he hesitated. "Well, I had a special reason." Before she can ask him about his special reason, he's like, "Ma'am," and leaves. Nancy finds Dave's behavior very suspicious, but to me it's pretty obvious he just has a crush on her and doesn't know how to talk to women. Just a painfully awkward guy who spends more time interacting with horses than girls. Later that evening, Nancy gets locked in the tack room in a scene so inconsequential I was going to leave it out of my recap until I took a closer look at the illustration that accompanies it. That's a bridle on the wall, just like in the game. I hope there's no one watching right now who isn't already a Nancy Drew fan, because I probably sound insane. Guys, it's the famous Shadow Ranch bridle. It's even hanging on the wall, just like in the game. Nancy Drew fans, when they see a horse, this is just like Nancy Drew's Secret of Shadow Ranch. I joke, but I'm pretty sure that's something I've said in real life. After escaping the tack room using a convenient crowbar, Nancy spots a light in the spring house, but when she opens the door, there's no one there. She realizes with her detective's intuition that there must be a secret passage between the spring house and the cellar. Nancy's detective's intuition covers a multitude of plot holes. However, when she goes to investigate the secret passage, she is interrupted by Shorty, so must put off her inspection for the time being. The next day, the girls go back into Tumbleweed with Dave. There's a big sign on the outskirts of town. Tumbleweed Rodeo, full stop. Barbecue and square dance, full stop. Saturday, full stop. 3 of my favorite things! Dave says to Nancy, "Will you go to the barbecue and square dance with me?" And of course she says yes. You simply can't turn down a handsome cowboy when he invites you to a barbecue and square dance. In town, they run into Mary, who introduces them to a tall, dark stranger named Mr. Diamond. He's wearing black, which in the language of westerns is a visual clue to the fact that he's a capital B bad, capital G guy. Because clearly anyone who would choose to wear black in the Arizona heat is a sick and twisted twisted.
Fun day.
Do you live around here? George asked. No, ma'am. I'm spending the summer in this area for my health. Mary smiled. Mr. Diamond spends most of his days riding horseback in the mountains for exercise. Honestly, spending my days riding horseback in the mountains for exercise? Yeah. That would heal me. Nancy, ever suspicious, thinks that Mr. Diamond might be the man in the big hat who supposedly caused the rock slide, just because he admits he has an interest in the romantic Old West. Nancy is taking such big leaps of conjecture you might imagine her to be wearing 7-league cowboy boots. But just like with Alice and her delusional claims, Nancy Drew is always right. Back at Shadow Ranch, a herd of prize palominos Uncle Ed ordered have been delivered. A little mare trotted into the enclosure. Dave wheeled beside her and herded the pony to the fence. Want a pet her? He asked Nancy. With a smile, Nancy stroked the sleek nose of the palomino. The mare nickered and shook her head. Dave laughed. Okay, little lady, he said. He slapped the pony on the rump, and she ran off to join the others. I initially misread this and thought it was Nancy he was calling little lady and slapping on the rump. Like, at least invite her out for dinner first, Dave! But Nancy thinks it's attractive, the way Dave slaps ponies on the rump. She admired the confident way he did his job and his kind, firm manner with the animals. I do hope he's not mixed up in the mystery, she sighed. That night, Nancy, Bess, and George finally have a chance to explore the secret passage, entering it from the spring house. On the other side of the secret passage, they come out in the cellar. Nancy turned the flashlight on. The sweeping beam caught a crouching figure in the corner. Dave Gregory! This absolute freak just crouching in the corner of the room in complete darkness? Are you digging for treasure? Nancy asked coolly. Yes, he said. I'm so sorry. Yes, he said. But I'm not pulling the phantom trick or causing the damage around here. Please believe me, Nancy. Let me tell you my story. My brother and sister and I are the only remaining descendants of Francis Humber. We have Valentine's original will and had always known the story of his treasure, but never bothered to hunt for it. I've been working my way through college, but will need more money to help educate my younger brother and sister, so I decided to take a summer job on Shadow Ranch and look for the treasure. Dave reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. Nancy saw that it was a faded photograph of a pretty woman. She also noticed that the corner was torn and the picture was just the right size to fit into the watch case. This is Francis Humber, she announced. The cowboy looked surprised. How did you know that? I don't know, maybe because you were just talking about her? This confirms that Dave is in fact the one with the prairie dog in him, or at least a brain the size of a prairie dog's. But we love him anyway. He's a cowboy and a himbo? How did Carolyn Keene so exactly predict my type before I was even born? Dave turned the picture over, and on the back the girls saw the word cellar, written in old-fashioned script. Nancy suggests that Frances Humber might have found the treasure while she was still alive, but Dave refutes this. Apparently after Dirk was killed, Frances's father sent her away to live with relatives, where she married, had 2 children, and died while still a young woman. Which kind of sounds like she married and had kids with one of her cousins or something. Not quite as romantic as the game, where Frances leaves home of her own volition and vows to never love another man after Dirk. Book Frances seems to have gotten over Dirk pretty quickly. The way Dave tells it, she almost immediately got married after leaving Shadow Ranch, potentially to one of her cousins. Dave then admits that he was the creeper creeping around the kitchen on Nancy's first night at the ranch. He also reveals a bit more about the circumstances surrounding the day of Dirk's death. Apparently when Sheriff Humber went to inform Frances that Dirk had been killed, she was in the living room of the ranch, lighting a lamp. And much like a metaphoric lamp being lit, this gives Nancy an idea. She rushes upstairs and finds a small green bottle and an antique lamp. Although you might assume this is further evidence of Aunt Bet's drinking problem, this is actually the green bottle the gang have been searching for. There's a letter inside addressed to Frances from Dirk. My dear girl, I'm writing this in haste to tell you that I truly love you. Would that we could marry. But the law pursues me and I doubt that I will live much longer. Too late I am sorry for my misspent life. I want you to have my fortune, the note continued, but many people are seeking it. I know my mail is seized. I have hidden instructions in this bottle. A little of my booty has been converted to gold and melted down into special pieces, dear Frances, made just for you. As Nancy was about to read on, the ceiling light went out. George gave an exclamation of annoyance. What a time for the bulb to go. It appears that the power has gone out in the whole house. The girls suppose there are more troublemakers around, prepping to work more mischief, as if these were just silly pranksters and not a gang of criminals who have already tried to kill them in a variety of inventive ways. Remember when those guys deliberately caused a rock slide to try to crush us to death? What a classic jape. Suspecting that these scalawags might be after the prize palominos, Nancy decides to saddle up and take stock of the situation. But before she mounts her horse, she felt the girth to be sure it had not been loosened. Yes, ACYG, always check your girth. Tex would be proud. Nancy leaves the stable riding Bob, and when she gets outside, she hears the weird whistle, which is the known signal to summon the phantom horse. She decides to chase down the phantom. As before, the phantom was heading straight across the meadow. Nancy rode hard to cut the animal off. In a moment, the apparition turned and raced down the meadow, straight toward the palominos. Shrilly whinnying, it plunged into their midst. Nancy's horse, trying to overtake the fleeing phantom, pounded through the scattered group. Suddenly, one of the frightened palominos thundered across her path. Frantically, Nancy tried to pull her own mount aside. Too late! The two horses collided. Nancy flew from the saddle and hit the ground so hard she blacked out. So after this head-on horse collision, Nancy falls into a crunched-up bone heap for the second time so far in this book, and once again she walks it off. Back in the house, George reminds her that she didn't finish reading Dirk Valentine's letter. Nancy reads aloud, "My treasure is hidden in the oldest dwelling on the ranch." The next morning, Tex reports that some no-good varmint cut through the ranch fence in 30 places last night and all the prize palominos escaped. Also, Dave tells the Raleighs about his treasure hunt. "If I do find the treasure," he added earnestly, "I certainly intend to turn over a share to you both." Mr. Raleigh smiled. "Thank you, Dave. But we wouldn't hear of it. I wish you luck." No, they don't even want a portion to say, help fix the fence or replace all those prize palominos which are now running wild across the state of Arizona. Their funeral, I suppose. Aunt Bet suggests that the girls drive into Phoenix, so George fills up a few containers of water for the journey. Dave grinned. "I'm glad to see that you tenderfoot gals have turned into water-conscious Westerners." When he was out of earshot, Alice said, "As for you, Nancy, he's really flipped." "And what'll poor Ned do?" George teased. "Ned is so cooked he might as well be a platter of steaming meat. There's just no way he can match up to a himbo cowboy." In the city, the girls wander around an outdoor art exhibition, part of which is a display of pastel drawings, and of course, soon enough, Alice was pale. "My father did that pastel, I know it." "Yes, dear." The drawings are being sold by a dealer who can't even draw a cow, but she's like, "Yes, I can tell you about the artist. First of all, his name is Bussy." The drive back to Shadow Ranch is uneventful, and the girls are greeted by some good news. The lights, telephone, and water have all been restored, and the cowpokes have found all but 4 of the prize palominos. I know you're all highly invested in the fate of these prize palominos. Aunt Bet reminded everyone of the barbecue next day. "It's customary for us ranch folks to take a dessert. Any suggestions?" Tex grinned. "I sure do cotton a chocolate cake." "Nancy makes scrumptious ones," said Bess. "Then I guess she's elected," Mrs. Raleigh said. "We're witnessing the origins of the infamous Shadow Ranch cake, which in this alternate universe is a chocolate cake. Dave, Tex, and Bud offer to help, which is 3 times more assistance than Nancy gets in the game, where she gets driven off the ranch with pitchforks and torches if she even so much as dares to touch an unripe vegetable while doing her chores. And she says to them, "You boys can shell the walnuts for topping the icing." A walnut topping on my Shadow Ranch cake? This is nuts! Tex grinned as he picked up a nutcracker. "Boys, we hired out to punch cows, and here we are peeling nuts." Hey, it's better than peeling cows and punching nuts. So Nancy begins to make the cake. When the cake was cool enough, she covered it with thick, creamy swirls of dark chocolate and studded the top with whole walnuts. Bess sighed. "It's too bad we can't have just a teeny piece now, isn't it? I sure could go for a slab." Tex agreed hungrily. "Come on, Cookie," Dave coaxed Nancy. "Cookie! He called her Cookie!" giggling and kicking my feet over here. But Nancy, thinking that things are moving much too quickly, announces that they will be eating graham crackers and milk tonight in an attempt to lower everyone's libido. The bulls aren't the only ones around here who are horny, okay? The next morning, Alice begs Nancy to take her to the mountain cabin again, sure that her father will be there. Yes, dear. When Nancy and Alice get to the cabin, a man opens the door, the same man who left the note on their car all the way back in chapter 1. Plot twist? He's Bussy. Bussy is unhelpful, and Nancy and Alice leave, still in the dark as to where Alice's father is. The next day, as Nancy gets ready for the big barbecue and square dance, she is hit by a bolt of detective's intuition. I think I know where the treasure is. In the cliff houses down the valley. They're certainly the oldest dwellings around here, said George, but they are not on the ranch. They were when Valentine wrote his letter. Sheriff Humber had been obliged to sell that part of the property after Valentine's death. So the group heads out for the event feeling good. They are joined by Tex's younger brother, Jack, who was replaced by a sister, Jane, in the game. The rodeo is bustling. This is the event of the calendar year. Everyone who's everyone is there. Mary Dear, Bussy, Mr. Diamond, the latter two of which try to kidnap Nancy next to the hot dog stand. However, their attempt is foiled by Nancy's wing woman, Bess and George, on their way to get a hot dog. I do kind of wish there was a rodeo in the game, but I understand why there isn't due to the technical limitations and reduced cast of characters. The most we get is a cookout cutscene, which lasts for approximately 20 seconds. Next comes the barbecue portion of the festivities, in which everyone eats, you guessed it, more steaming meat. And Nancy's cake, of course. Bud plays a few cowboy songs on his guitar, then Shorty hustles on stage and grabs the microphone. Shorty leaned toward the microphone and said, "Folks, how'd you like me to do my imitations?" Absolute worst case scenario at an open mic. A man gets up and announces he's going to do some impressions. Actually, I don't know what's worse. Shorty's impressions in the book or Shorty's yodeling in the game. Yodeling! Let me know which you would hate to have to sit through more in the comments. Next, Nancy takes the opportunity to announce to everyone that she believes she's found the location of Dirk Valentine's legendary treasure, and that tomorrow a group of men from Shadow Ranch will be going out to dig for it. But this is in fact a ruse, intended to distract the criminals from finding the real location of the treasure. The next day, a group of the cowpokes go out on the fraudulent treasure hunt, and Nancy and her friends set off in the opposite direction to find the real loot. But first, they make a stop at Bussy's cabin and discover the phantom horse, in reality a handsome black stallion. Nearby, Nancy finds a bundle of white material. No way is the phantom horse a literal sheet ghost. Incredible! Then the group climbs to the cliff houses, where they find Alice's father just casually hanging out in the room next to the treasure. This has to be the coincidence of all time, that the criminal gang stashed Mr. Alice in the location Nancy and friends were headed to, where the treasure is also hidden without knowing that either Nancy will be there or that the treasure is there, and without knowing that their hostage is Alice's father. It's almost enough to make you believe in some higher power, some great ghost writer in the sky. Someone should write a song about that. Mr. Alice explains that he was kidnapped during the bank robbery and that he's been held in the cabin for 6 months. But he's gone out with the gang on multiple outings, and each time Nancy and her friends came close to finding him, such as at the ghost town, they hustled Mr. Alice out of sight. It's kinda sweet how they let him accompany them on their little touristy day trips. Maybe the real Dirk Valentine's treasure is the friends we made, the hostages we took along the way. If this was real life, they would have just killed Mr. Alice instead of going through this whole rigmarole. He actually mentions that the gang have been talking about getting rid of him after they leave Shadow Mountain, but like, what are they waiting for? Why not just kill him now and leave his body in the wilderness for the vultures to find? Mr. Alice officially confirms that the gang is composed of Shorty, Mr. Diamond, and Bussy. Alice stays with her father while Nancy, Bess, and George search through the cliff dwellings for Dirk Valentine's treasure. Nancy finds this mythical treasure people have been searching for decades in about 5 minutes. It's just sitting in a vase. Much like the game, it's composed of solid gold hearts, as well as some banknotes and jewels. Nancy begins to light a fire at the top of the cliffs, a pre-agreed signal to Dave and the others that they found the treasure, but as she does so, a voice from behind her says, "Put out that fire!" It's not a diligent park ranger, but Mr. Diamond, who makes Nancy kick out the fire. Mr. Diamond is soon joined by his compatriots, Shorty and Bussy. Nancy beats the pranksters at their own game by wrapping a rock in her sweater and hurling it off the cliff, making them think she's just thrown the treasure away. A classic jape, Diamond said. "Bussy, you and I'll go down to the valley and find the treasure. Shorty, guard these girls till you get my signal." At this, Nancy chuckled. "Poor Shorty. By the time you reach the valley, your pals and the treasure will be gone." This kicks off a flurry of infighting amongst the criminals. Eventually, it's decided that Shorty and Bussy will head out to look for the treasure, leaving Mr. Diamond to take care of the prisoners. A soft laugh came from the gang leader. "In case you're wondering, I'm opening a wooden box where we keep dynamite and fuses." Gasps came from the prisoners. "You can't do that," George cried out. "I'm forced to. Ross Rigor knows too much, and I can't afford to let him go. Too bad, Nancy Drew, that you butted into my affairs." He's going to blow them up with dynamite? The same guy who kept procrastinating on killing his hostage because it was simply too much effort? Fortunately, before he can, Dave and Sheriff Curtis arrive as knights in shining spurs to save the day, and Dave calls Nancy the smartest little tenderfoot he ever saw. Catch me swooning. Dave and the sheriff have already caught Shorty and Bussy. They are Bronco busted. How many years in prison do you think you get for attempting to blow up 5 people with dynamite? How many for making a horse wear a sheet ghost costume? How many for getting up at an open mic night and performing your amateur impressions? Dave said he thought Nancy should have a share of the treasure. I know the gold must be turned over to the state, but the jewels and banknotes should be worth a good sum. Nancy, since you found them, I feel a share rightfully belongs to you. The young detective smiled, then graciously but firmly declined to accept any part of the find. "It was fun," she said. "Nancy has got to be the only person happy to be paid an exposure."
Dear Hannah, it turns out that Shorty had ridden to the cliff dwellings on the Phantom Horse, which was really just a trick horse that a friend of one of his bank robber buddies had trained.
And that's the secret of Shadow Ranch. On a scale from not at all to truly, tell me how fascinated you are right now in the comments. This book is very similar to the game in a lot of ways. Apart from the ones I mentioned throughout the video, there are a few other significant differences. For instance, the hunt for Dirk Valentine's treasure has more steps in the game, which makes sense in an interactive medium that doesn't pause every 10 pages to describe everyone's cute outfits. And not only is Shorty Thurmond a combination of Shorty Steele and Mrs. Thurmond, in the game Tex takes on Dave's initially ornery personality. That was a bit of a tongue twister. Tex also has a much expanded role in the game and is more than just a spare date for Bess and/or George. There's no scene in the book where Shorty kicks Nancy out of the ranch for picking a single unripe tomato. There's also a discrepancy between the two timelines. You might have noticed the amount of times I said the next morning or the next day. I counted at least 8 days in Nancy's investigation in the book, and that's not counting the days I skipped over in my recap, whereas Game Nancy solves the mystery in a tidy 3 days. Game Nancy is speedrunning Book Nancy's life. And that's the type of sentence that only makes sense after you watch a half-hour video on an incredibly niche subject.
Yahoo!